Greetings, lords and ladies. I am currently in the midst of scripting my review of the game, but that might take a while. I have real-life obligations and real-life work to attend to. But I thought in the interim I could talk about a topic that I deem to be very important, that is both highly relevant to the gaming world and the Dragon Age IP more broadly. So, in recent times, there's been a lot of talk of gaming tourism, and it's usually weaponized in political discourse. Because I think ultimately, what has become of the Dragon Age IP is an important lesson for all of us, and specifically for those of us who are aficionados of the RPG genre, because not all games are the same. There are different genres, and what has become of Dragon Age is, to be perfectly blunt and frank, an absolute abomination and an absolute shame, a scandal. So when I'm talking about tourism within the context of games, I'm talking about what occurs when the original supporters and enthusiasts of a particular IP within a particular genre are marginalized, a word that is bandied about much but in an inappropriate way in my opinion, and the criticisms of these original RPG players and upholders of a certain IP are dismissed as insignificant, unimportant, and irrelevant. Now, the reason why I think Dragon Age as an IP is an important lesson for all of us who enjoy RPGs as a genre is because of its transformation. It's no secret that every Dragon Age game that came out, subsequently to Dragon Age Origins, has been at times radically different. And you can say that the final incarnation, or abomination, that is Dragon Age The Veilguard, is the final nail in the coffin. But what happened? What happened to lead us down this path of destruction? You see, there's a general trend in the gaming world these days, especially and most unfortunately in the RPG genre, that I can only describe as casualization and massification. Fodder for the masses, basically. Now, this principle could apply to other genres within gaming, but the problem is RPGs have been hit the hardest in this respect. No question here. So we start Dragon Age with this deep storytelling found within Dragon Age Origins, witty banter in a dark fantasy setting. It's grim, it's a harsh world, you have to make sacrifices all the time, there's excellent story reactivity, and there's good party-based tactical combat. And it's just a good RPG. But unfortunately, that doesn't appeal to the broad masses. And for whatever reason, be it EA or the designers of Dragon Age, it begins to lose its RPG core in terms of the elements, certainly in terms of combat, and increasingly in terms of dialogue, in terms of decisions. The final blow, as it were, is Dragon Age The Veilguard, which is not an RPG at all in my opinion. So what happened? Well, BioWare decided to let tourists into the playground, so to speak. And whether this was a financial decision to cast as wide a net as possible, to capture as much money as possible from as many customers as possible, or something else, we just don't know. And I'm not going to speculate on that particular issue right here. But suffice to say, we do know that the expectations of the Dragon Age player base change radically, especially with Dragon Age Inquisition. And I'm of the view, obviously, that Dragon Age Origins is the best of the Dragon Ages. Dragon Age Inquisition is okay. It's pretty decent overall. There are things I don't like about it and things I do like about it, but it's not a terrible game. It's fine. It's okay. But the problem I see here is that BioWare in time let in people whose priorities are quite distinct and different from those of classical RPG players. For example, to me, and to many people I've talked to, the core of a good RPG is a combination of good and interesting combat mechanics coupled by good storytelling with impactful choices. Now, there are other elements that can be incorporated in that. One of them is romance, which is seemingly something that modern BioWare fans are obsessed with to the detriment of all else in a game, but the core elements are, and have always been and remain, good, interesting combat mechanics coupled by good storytelling with impactful choices and reactivity. That is what makes a good RPG. Whether it's more broadly of the action RPG genre or a CRPG in the classic sense, at the core, that is what a good RPG game is. That is not the priority of the newer BioWare fans since Dragon Age Inquisition. Unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of people that were onboarded with Dragon Age Inquisition are in fact tourists to the RPG genre, and they would be better suited to be playing games such as The Sims. They, generally speaking, do not prioritize deep storytelling, reactivity, and consequences, and they certainly don't care about combat. In fact, some of these people mod out combat completely in games. Now, if these are the core elements of an RPG, deep storytelling, and combat, but you don't care about those things, are you an RPG fan? Well, no. If your sole priority is romance, and your desire to copulate with pixels on a screen, that does not make you an RPG fan. And this, coupled by some other things, is frankly speaking the core of the problem. The BioWare player base has been shattered into many different pieces, and these pieces are incoherent and incompatible with each other. On the one hand, you have fans, enthusiasts of real RPG games who value RPG elements, the core elements of RPGs, and on the other hand, you have people who value romance and relationships and prioritize those things above all else, which is why I said they'd be better off playing Sims games. Essentially, this is a question of stay in your lane. Now, before I'm preemptively yelled at that BioWare has always had romances, that's largely true. Baldur's Gate 1 had no romances, but Baldur's Gate 2 did. But these romances were always part of the greater backdrop of the story, or integrated within the story. They were never the story. They were never the main element. And if you look at modern-day BioWare fans, that's what they value more than anything else. They value things that a 2014 Tumblrette would be proud of, but no sane-minded RPG player would be. And this is the core of the divide. Of course, there are other things that people prioritize, but when I look at the broader landscape and what happened to Dragon Age as an IP, I see a bunch of people who are not RPG players, whose sole interest, generally speaking, is interactions, romances, in a way that's more important than the actual story. And obviously the combat, rather than being incorporated within the bigger picture of the story, of the RPG. The fact that the combat in Dragon Age The Veilguard is terrible, and I have a lot more to say about that in my review, is irrelevant to them, because you can just put on story mode, god mode, whatever. In fact, I would encourage you to do so because the combat is so painfully boring and tedious. The fact that it looks cartoony and unserious, that doesn't bother them, because ultimately what they want is Disney-esque romances told in the context of a BioWare game. And the way BioWare fans talk about the game, you can see that they're most interested in copulating with pixels. They care primarily about romancing various characters. They don't care a whit about combat, and to varying degrees don't really care about the story itself. In fact, when you look at most people's complaints of the new sort of BioWare fans, their complaint is not that the lore of the story of Dragon Age is improperly implemented in the game. No, it's not that. Their complaint is that the romance of Llewellyn, the Inquisitor with Solas, is not properly fulfilled in the game Dragon Age The Veilguard, that there's no proper good resolution to it. They don't get the feels out of it. That's their complaint about the lore. Not the ham-fisted, sledgehammer-like ways that the lore is simply dropped on your head in the worst exposition possible. Not that. No, Llewellyn doesn't get a suitable ending to her romance. That's what they care about. These are tourists to the RPG genre. And in order to fundamentally quell that truth, they call us tourists. I've been playing RPGs since the early 90s. This is not how they used to be. And the player base back then, and throughout the early aughts, was not like this. There has been a transformation. We are not the tourists, the newcomers are. And they collectively, with a bunch of political activists and ideologues who prioritize real-life politics over good storytelling and making good games, they are responsible for the destruction of the Dragon Age IP. And again, to preempt the commentary that politics has always been part of Dragon Age, yes, it has, within the confines of the Dragon Age game itself. Politics is great when it comes to games, as long as it is explored in the context of the setting, in concert with the lore, with the history, and with our understanding of the setting. Shoehorning real-life politics into a game is a surefire path to its destruction. Because again, if you're an activist, like a lot of the developers are, then you are going to prioritize real-life politics over making a good game. So, what is the solution going forward when it comes to new IPs? Or IPs that are not yet lost, because Dragon Age is lost? The solution is, again, stay in your lane. If you try to please everyone, you will fail. If you try to make a game for everyone, you will fail. A game that tries to do everything ends up doing nothing. That's the problem. However, if you cater to your core audience, if you stick with the original upholders and supporters of the genre and of the IP, you can do no wrong. Look at what Owlcat has done. They started with Kingmaker, a flawed but very good game. And then, in Wrath of the Righteous, they took a new story, but more importantly, they iterated upon what was in Kingmaker. And so you basically got an improved version overall of Kingmaker, which many of us love. They added turn-based combat as an option. They added more archetypes and classes. And arguably, I would say that the Wenduog romance, to talk about romance, in Wrath of the Righteous, is one of the best ones out there in CRPGs. So Owlcat took a product that they made. It was pretty good. They iterated upon it, built upon it, and improved it, because I think Wrath of the Righteous in its totality is an excellent game. Kingmaker is not as good, but it was their first game. So you have a formula, and you improve upon that formula. That's how it should be done. What Owlcat has not done is, to be perfectly blunt, take a dump on their core base of customers. And that's the problem here, lords and ladies. Owlcat knows that they have a core set of fans, and they do so much to try to please those fans. It's excellent. I mean, Owlcat is easily my favorite studio. But more importantly, Owlcat knows that the key to success in the future is to build upon the systems that they've already created, not radically alter them to the detriment of the player base and to the detriment of their enjoyment of the games. And this should hold true axiomatically for basically every developer out there, independent of the genre. Whatever that genre is, stick to the core elements. Make sure that you improve upon that. When you do that, you retain the core audience. Newcomers will be attractive, newcomers who have not heard about the game, and you will still make money and profit long term. But you do this in a way that doesn't alienate the core people that help build your IP. And a final point here. Notice how, when it comes to Owlcat games, there is no real division here. Yes, people will quibble about this or that minor detail. There are different opinions, but nobody who enjoys Owlcat games loves their games on the one hand, or hates them on the other. You just have people who like their games and differ on certain takes within the games. Compare that with BioWare games, specifically Dragon Age, and you have people such as myself and others I've talked to that have come to really hate their games. And on the other side of the equation, you have romance-obsessed Tumblrites who love their games. That is not a cohesive, coherent player base. And this is all on BioWare ultimately. They have sown the seeds of their own destruction, and this has led to the sundering and division in the player base. Stick with the core elements, stick with your core audience, independent of the genre. Like I said, this applies to every genre of game. Now myself, I don't really play games such as Space Marine 2, but I recognize a hit when it exists. People love that game. It's a very specific type of game, tailored to a very specific audience. It doesn't pretend to be something else. It doesn't strive to be something else. And that's essential. And I personally am very pleased for the enthusiasts of Space Marine 2. And the same holds true for Black Myth Wukong. Now, to name a large exception to this rule of staying in your lane and cultivating your core player base and core elements, I have to name Baldur's Gate 3. But Baldur's Gate 3, for lack of a better word, is pretty anomalous. It manages to push so many buttons in the right way, such that the people who enjoy combat systems and builds enjoy the game, the people that enjoy storytelling with reactivity enjoy the game, and perhaps most interestingly, or absurdly, the people who prioritize romancing and copulating with pixels on the screen get their due as well. Somehow, Larian managed to pull this off, and it should be added that what they've done in Baldur's Gate 3 is no guarantee that they can pull this off in the future. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. In general, stick with the axiom of building upon the core elements of your game, improving upon them with each iteration of each game you put out there on the market, and they will come. The enthusiasts for your genre, be it RPG, first-person shooter, whatever it is, even The Sims, they will come. We can all learn an important lesson from the destruction and annihilation of Dragon Age as an IP. And this is the lesson that needs to be taken home. It's not a lesson for BioWare, because the developers are too far gone, as are the new fans. But it is a lesson for other developers who have not yet trodden this path, who wish to make good games and cultivate their core audience and build upon it. They will be profitable and they will do well. In any event, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you like my videos and my takes, be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. It's much appreciated. And I will check you out next time. Take care.